Okay, today we're going to be checking the calibration on an MENA003 unit, 120 volt. This is 310 inch-pound actuator, quarter turn, and it accepts analog signals, either 4 to 20 or 2 to 10, and that's selectable by dip switches that are found on the actuator control board. So this model is calibrated for 4 to 20 control, and we're going to go ahead and run through the calibration procedure. It's a little bit more complicated than the on-off units, but basically it's a fairly straightforward process. So first thing we're going to do is I've got an analog signal generator that I can control the analog output signal and read the 4 to 20 input signal at the same time. The output command signal is on the bottom showing 12 milliamps, and the input signal on the top is showing 0 milliamps because there's no power on the actuator. So while I've got this connected according to the wiring diagram, we've got our 120 volts on terminals 4 and 5. We got our 4 to 20 analog signal coming into 6 and 7, positive on 7. And then we've got our 4 to 20 feedback coming out of 11 and 12 with the positive on number 12. I should note that the analog signal reference in and the feedback reference out to terminals 6 and 11 are common to each other. So we're running this with a 3-wire control to do analog output and feedback at the same time with a common analog signal, analog reference. So what we'll do is I'm going to go ahead and power up this actuator, and we should see immediately the feedback signal coming on and telling us that because the actuator is roughly at 50% position, we are seeing 11.83 on the feedback. So what this is telling me is that we're generating an analog signal. I can bump this up to 75%, and we should see the actuator run counterclockwise to go further open, and we should see the analog signal follow it. So I'm going to change this. We're at 16, and it's increasing, and it has gone to the full open position. And as likewise, taking it down should drive it counterclockwise to the closed position. And so the analog signal positive is going for the control to the actuator is working. It's working in the actuator is responding in the correct direction, and the feedback is tracking correctly. So you know the wiring is all set between the analog inputs and the analog feedbacks. Everything is working properly. So once we've established that, then we can go through and set the travel on the actuator. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and run the actuator to the full open position, 100%. And we're going to see we're at 20 milliamps, but we only have 16.7 milliamps showing on the feedback system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look in the actuator, and I can see that the valve is not fully open. You can see it's not quite open all the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to calibrate the cams, in this case, on these analog actuators. The cams have to be adjusted for proper end of travel before you calibrate the analog portion of the board. This top control board sets the response to the analog signal and also calibrates the feedback generated out for the, to make sure that your remote feedback is telling you exactly where the actuator is. So in this case, we've generated a full 20 milliamp signal to go fully open, but the valve hasn't gone fully open. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the power from the actuator, and I'm going to set the valve to the full open position. This is an A003 unit, so it's got a manual, 8mm manual override on the bottom, and I want to open the valve further. So I'm going to go ahead and run this manually till the valve is in the full open position. So since the power is off, the actuator is not going to respond adversely at all for repositioning. So once I've got the actuator set, the valve is in the full open position. The indicator on the top of the actuator is showing fully open. So now I'm going to adjust the cam that tells me the end of travel on the actuator. So looking at the wiring diagram, you can see that the number 1 cam, since we're calibrating the fully open position, the number 1 cam is the one that we want to adjust for the full open position. And you might be able to see this on here where if we want it to go further open from where it stopped, we want to move the cam to the left. And if we want it to go less open, a little less in that direction, we want to move the cam to the right. So we needed it to go further open, so I'm going to be moving it to the left until I hear the switch hit, click. Right there. So now I've got the cam set for the full open position. And I'm going to, at the same time, I'm going to set the auxiliary switch. And here I can hear it click, and then I'm going to go just a little bit further so that the switch trips before the end of travel stops the actuator. Now I'm in a full open position on the valve. The indicator is telling me I'm fully open, and I've got the cam set for the full open position. I'm going to go ahead and turn the power back on, and the actuator should now show me 20 milliamps in the full open position. So I'm generating a 20 milliamp signal. The feedback is telling me we are we're a little bit past fully open. So to calibrate that, what we would do is, with the actuator powered up and looking at the wiring diagram, you can see we've got 4 trimmer potentiometers on the wiring diagram: VR1, 2, 51, and 52. And over on the wiring diagram, you can see VR1 is what you use to calibrate your full scale input into the actuator. So VR1, which is this one up here, we're going to adjust that with power on the actuator. You can see that right now the green indicator is not illuminated. So I'm going to adjust VR1. First I'm going to go counterclockwise and then slowly turning it to the clockwise direction until this indicator turns on. Right there. We're right on the cusp of being fully open. There we go. So now the green indicator is on, telling me that the response of the control signal is set correctly. And then, looking at the wiring diagram, the full-scale feedback is VR51, which happens to be on the lower right side of the board. And I'm going to adjust VR51. And you can watch this 20 milliamp feedback signal. You can see it turn, and I can bring it right in, dial it right in, so it's almost exact, right where it needs to be. Close enough, within a hundredth of a milliamp. So now I've got the full open position set on the valve, on the cams, and on the analog control input and the feedback output. It's all calibrated. Let's go ahead and generate a close command. We'll go to 0%. This should go to 4 milliamps. And the actuator is going to drive in a closed position, clockwise, closed direction. I'm watching the feedback drop. And now I'm in the full response from the actuator is at 4 milliamps. That's in a full closed position as far as the signal is concerned. But I can see that the feedback is at 6.5. And that tells me that the valve is not fully closed. So if I look at this, I can look down into the bore and I can see the valve is, of course, not fully closed. I'm going to turn off the power. I'm going to use the manual override and go in a closed direction now. And I'm going to drive this closed. And now the valve is fully closed mechanically. The indicator is showing in a full closed position. I've got 4 milliamps going in. Now, before I turn the power back on, I'm going to adjust the cams. And looking at the wiring diagram, I can see the closed cams are the red ones, number 2 and number 4. Those are our 2 cams. So the number 2 cam, I want to adjust that to go further closed, and that would be to the right. So moving further closed on the number 2 cam. There we go. Got closed position set. I'll adjust the auxiliary switch. Right there and a little bit further. So now I've got the cams set for the correct clockwise closed position. If I turn the power on, I should see this come very, very close to 4 milliamps. And we're very close, 3.97. So the board is almost completely calibrated for the 4 milliamp position. If it needs to be calibrated, you would use in the input signal for the clockwise position is VR2, which is this one here, and the feedback is VR52, which is the one on the left. So VR2, VR52. I would adjust VR2 until I see this red indicator turn on. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and adjust VR52 and calibrate this in so I can watch the feedback, the 4 to 20 feedback come right into where I need it. That actuator is now calibrated. So let's go ahead and check 50%. So now the actuator is in the 50% position. The valve is actually 50% open. And we got a 12 milliamp signal going in. We have a 12 milliamp signal coming out. This actuator is perfectly calibrated, and the calibration is done as far as mechanical and analog response for positioning the actuator. So the last thing now what I'm going to check is I'm going to go to 100% open, 20 milliamp signal. And you can see that the auxiliary switch is telling us that we are in the full open position. If you adjust the number 3 cam, you can see that switch make or break. And so after the actuator is run to the full end of travel, 20 milliamps, if the indicator is not on, you just have to move this until it comes on. And just a little bit more. And now when I go down, I can see that that's going to turn off as soon as it starts moving. The auxiliary switch is now set. I'll go back down to the 0% mark, 4 milliamps, and this switch should come on before it stops. Perfect. If you had to calibrate that switch, that would be the number 2 cam, or sorry, the number 4 cam. Moving it would calibrate your complete clockwise position. If the cams is not tripping, you would bring this over and just a little bit to the left and just a little bit further. Check this by moving out 25%. That switch should go off. Perfect. Back down to 20%, 0%. Perfect. So we've now got a fully calibrated analog unit. Mechanically it's set. Analog travel is set, and the feedback is set, and the auxiliary switches are set. So the last thing that we want to make sure is that the actuator is in the full closed position, which we've done that. We've verified that it is. Indicators showing closed, and this unit is fully calibrated. So that's that. And remember, don't lick the wires.